In the heart of the Arizona wilderness, a lone Apache warrior found a half-dead girl whispering, "Please, don't take the cloth off." But when he did, his hand started shaking. Arizona Territory, late summer of 1891. That year the earth didn't forgive. The rain had quit by spring and never came back. What little grass that once covered the valley had long turned to ash under the sun's hard eye, and the wind didn't sing anymore, it just scraped. Up in the high country where the pines grew old and the rocks held memories, there lived a man no one talked about and no one came looking for. Folks who passed through the nearest town called him Ghost or worse. But he had a name once, Nakai, son of the Red Cliff Apache. Now he was just a man who didn't belong anywhere, not even in his own blood. Once long ago he had a family, a campfire, a village filled with voices and children and elders who told stories at night. But the soldiers came with their fire and their orders, and they burned the stories with the people who carried them. Nakai had been 17 then, strong, proud, fast. But not fast enough, not strong enough. He'd hidden when the smoke rolled in, hid and lived. That was the price. And so he wandered the canyons for years, until one day his legs carried him to a patch of land between two stone ridges that looked like the ribs of the earth. He stayed, built a shelter from timber and rock, hunted what he needed, talked to no one. He did not sing. He did not pray. He buried the last of his words with his brother's name carved into a flat stone up on the hill where the juniper trees still grew. The world had moved on. Rail tracks cut through mountains, telegrams flew faster than birds, and men with shiny buttons said this land belonged to something called the United States. But up here in this ragged corner of the Arizona Territory, Nakai answered to no one. Only the wind and the hunger in his gut. Until that morning. That morning started like any other. He'd been tracking a deer since dawn prints along the ridge, fresh droppings by the scrub. But halfway through the slope, the trail changed. Smaller prints, human, barefoot, light but frantic, and dragging. He crouched near a half-dried spring and stared at the tracks, puzzled. A woman alone. Out here. Either foolish or running. Maybe both. He followed. Not fast. Quiet like the old ways taught, no crunch, no echo, just wind and bone. Then he heard it. Not a deer, not a coyote, not a snake. Breathing. Labored. Thin as thread. Somewhere past the rocks. He crept forward step by step until he saw her. She was crumpled by the roots of a twisted juniper, not moving, but not dead. Just folded in on herself like something broken. Covered in dirt and blood, dressed in a torn strip of white cloth that didn't cover much. Arms scraped raw, lips cracked, feet blistered. But her eyes were open. Blue. When she saw him, she flinched. Tried to move, but couldn't. She pressed the cloth tighter to herself like it could hide her from the world. And then, with barely a voice, she said, "Please, don't take me back." Nakai's jaw clenched. White girl. Maybe 19, maybe older. She was trembling ribs, shaking under the thin fabric. A mess of cuts across her chest and back. Someone had worked her over bad. Could see it without needing to look long. But he didn't step closer. Didn't offer his water. Didn't pull his knife. He just stood there. His fingers twitched toward the bow on his back, not to use it, but out of habit. A thing he did when his heart beat too loud. He told himself to walk away. Not his business. She was white, and white meant trouble. Meant soldiers, guns, questions. Meant he'd end up face down in the dirt again while someone else wrote his story. He didn't owe her a damn thing. But she was still looking at him. Those pale eyes clouded but not gone. Not yet. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Don't let them find me." Nakai's breath caught. Something in her voice, it wasn't begging. It was beyond that. It was someone who already believed she'd die, just didn't want it to be today. He looked at her again. Really looked. There were burns on her shoulders, fresh, still weeping, and scars deliberate jagged like someone tried carving letters into her back. He swallowed hard. Back then, back when they came for his people, some women were taken, he never saw them again, never found out what happened. But he remembered one girl in particular. Her name was Tiva. She was small, fast, always singing. She screamed the loudest when the flames started. He can't saved her. And here he was now standing over another girl screaming without a voice. His hands moved before he told them to. He unfastened the rawhide cloak from his shoulder, stepped forward, slow, crouched down, and laid it over her. She blinked, stared at him like she didn't believe it. Shh, he muttered the first sound he'd spoken in months. He didn't know what else to say, didn't have words for what was knotting in his chest. So he picked her up. She didn't weigh more than a winter blanket. And she didn't fight, didn't ask who he was, just let her head fall against his shoulder, eyes shut. Nakai carried her back across the ridge, wind at his back, every step a fight between the man he'd been and the one he'd buried. Back at his shelter, he set her down on his cot, lit the fire, boiled water, mixed herbs into a pot like his grandmother once taught him, willow bark, yarrow, mint. She didn't stir, just lay curled tight like something trying to disappear. He watched her chest rise and fall. At some point that night she whispered again, "My name, Ellie." He didn't answer, just nodded, though she couldn't see it. For the next day and a half he sat by the fire, barely sleeping. She drank a little when he held the cup to her lips. Didn't speak again, but she didn't cry either, just stared at the roof like it might fall. Ellie didn't speak much those first few days, not out loud anyway. Her body said enough. She flinched every time Nakai entered the room, even when his boots made no sound. Her hands would grip the blanket tighter, pulling it up to her chin like armor. She watched him through half-closed eyes, always tracking, waiting maybe for him to change. He never did. He gave her space, didn't ask questions, kept a pot of broth going on the fire, and brought water to the edge of the bed without pushing it on her. She drank when she could, ate what she could keep down. The rest of the time she just lay still, wrapped in his old deer-hide cloak, like it might shield her from the world. But one afternoon, when the sun was bleeding orange across the doorway and the crickets started their song, she moved. He'd been grinding up some dried willow bark near the fire when he heard the shift of weight, soft, cautious, like a rabbit testing a snare. She sat up slowly, wincing, one hand pressed to her lower back. "I need help," she said, her voice barely above the crackling logs. He turned, not fast, just enough to let her know he heard. She didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she stared at the wall as she spoke again. "My back. It got bad. The burns. They're open." He didn't speak, just stood, took the small bowl of crushed bark, and added a bit of bear fat and warm water from the kettle. It made a thick paste, cooling if done right. She looked at him now, just for a second. Her eyes flicked to the bowl, then back to his face. Her jaw tightened. "You'll have to touch it." Nakai said nothing. He just nodded once, slow, and crouched beside the bed, letting her see every movement. When he reached for the blanket, she stopped him. Her hand shot out, trembling. Her breath came hard, eyes wide, like a deer with its leg in a trap. "I can do it myself," she said quickly, voice cracking. But then her fingers pulled back, her shoulders dropped, and something behind her eyes, not trust, not yet, but permission. She turned away from him, tugged the blanket down to her waist. What lay beneath wasn't a back anymore. It was a battlefield. Burns deep and angry, some still weeping, others scabbed over in jagged lines. Symbols, letters, brands that didn't make sense. English maybe, or just hate made into shapes. Nakai didn't speak, didn't flinch. He'd seen what soldiers did to his own people, how they marked the women, left them as messages. This wasn't new to him. It was just another wound the world carved into the quiet. He dipped 2 fingers into the salve and gently as smoke touched the edge of a wound. She tensed, every muscle locked, but she didn't pull away. He worked slow, careful. Let the medicine settle in before moving to the next. His fingers were rough from years in the wild, but his touch held something few hands still carried: patience. "I learned this from my grandmother," he said low, just above a whisper. "She used to say Willow speaks to pain better than we do." Ellie didn't answer, but her shoulders loosened just a little. "Enough." He continued dabbing the mix across the worst of the welts, avoiding any torn skin. When he finished, he pulled the blanket back up, stood, and went to rinse his hands without a word. It wasn't until later that night, when the moon was high and her voice came like a leaf brushing against stone, that she spoke again. "They kept us underground. A place by the river, I don't know where. No windows. Just walls and mud and men with cigars in their mouths and knives in their belts." Nakai said nothing, didn't look up. "They said they were going to sell us, one by one, like cattle." She paused, swallowed. Her voice didn't shake now, it burned. "I tried to run the first time. They broke my nose with a rifle butt, said next time they'd break more." He heard her shift. The blanket rustled. "Second time I made it past the fence, almost to the trees. They caught me, used a branding iron, said I was theirs now. Forever." Silence. "I didn't scream that time. I just went somewhere else." The fire cracked. Sparks popped into the dark. Third time, she said, I stopped breathing, just laid there, still. Let my heart slow until it barely moved. They thought I died. Nakai looked over then. Her face was in shadow, but her eyes were wide open. I waited till night, crawled out with the trash, took a curtain off a busted truck window to cover myself, ran. She turned her head toward him. "That's when you found me." He didn't answer, didn't need to. The fire between them cracked once, throwing a shower of orange sparks into the night. Nakai leaned back against the wall, hands resting over his knees, the bowl of old tin cooling beside him. Ellie had turned her face toward the shadows again, pulling the blanket up past her shoulder. For a while, neither of them moved. The night held its breath. Somewhere outside, a coyote called out high and long, a sound that had no beginning or end. It was the sort of cry that made you remember things you wished you'd buried deeper. Nakai sat still, but his eyes stayed open, focused, watching the dark edges where firelight faded into black. That girl's story had carved something open inside him, something he'd sealed off long ago. But he didn't show it, didn't let it show in the way he moved or breathed. Not yet. Later that night, when she'd finally drifted to sleep, her chest rising steady beneath the layers, Nakai stepped outside the hut. The air was dry, brittle, and carried a smell he didn't like. Not the usual earth and ash scent of pine needles or stone warmed by the sun. This was something sharper, foreign. He crouched low to the ground, fingers brushing the dirt just beyond the fire pit. There, faint but present, a track. Not hers. Too wide, too deep. A fresh print just outside the circle of their camp. Boots. Someone had been close. Too close. His jaw tightened. He stood slowly, walked out beyond the nearest tree, checking the snare lines he'd set days ago, not for rabbits this time, but for men. Quiet traps. Warning traps. Thin wire that could slice a man's ankle deep if he wasn't paying attention. 2 had been tripped. The wire lay tangled beside prints that showed where someone had stumbled, caught themselves, then backed away. Someone was sniffing around, watching. But Nakai didn't go back inside and wake her. He didn't light more fire or raise alarm. There wasn't any panic in his bones. Just the weight of a truth he'd lived with his whole life. That danger never made noise when it came. It watched first, waited, took its time. So he sharpened the blades near the door, moved the bow closer to his bed, relayed the wire traps and carved notches in the trees to mark where they'd failed. Then he sat, and he listened. The fire behind him gave the illusion of safety. But it was the dark in front of him that mattered. In the morning, Ellie stirred slow. Her body still carried stiffness from wounds that hadn't fully closed, but she moved with purpose. She asked for warm water. She cleaned the little bowl herself. Nakai watched her from the edge of the clearing as he rubbed bear fat into the wood of his bow. She was different this morning. Not strong, not yet. But there was a pulse to her now, something like spirit. She didn't wear fear like a second skin anymore. At least not every minute. Later that afternoon, she stood on her own and carried firewood back from the edge of the grove. Only 5 steps, but she did it without asking for help. Nakai noticed her glance at the ridge line a few times, cautious, but she never spoke of it. She hadn't seen the tracks, didn't know anyone had been near, and he intended to keep it that way. In the days that followed, Ellie settled into the rhythm of the wild. She asked about the plants he dried above the stove, listened when he told her the bark could ease pain or cool fever. She helped strip pine branches and asked how long it took the rain to return to this place. Nakai answered when needed, short and plain. He wasn't used to questions. Most things in his life had stopped needing answers long ago, but he didn't mind hers. There was something in the way she leaned into quiet, not because she was afraid, but because she respected it. She didn't push for stories, but she listened when he offered one slow, halting things about the wolves who used to walk this land in threes, about the mountain that never took the same shape twice. He told her one night about the snow wolf, how it came only in the deepest part of winter, silent and white and full of sadness, and how it was said to never kill for hunger, only for mercy. She'd smiled then. Not much, just a soft pull of her lips, the kind that hurt to hold, but came anyway. "That's a lonely kind of story," she said. He didn't disagree. What she didn't know was that his story had stopped long before she arrived. Nakai had been 10 when the soldiers came. 10 years old, and still sleeping next to his brother in a hide tent near the Red Ridge, dreaming of mountain lions and running deer. The dream shattered when the first rifle cracked. His mother had screamed. His father ran toward the fire with nothing but a stick in hand, both of them gone before he made it out of the tent. The rest he couldn't tell if he'd lived it, or if the nightmare had twisted itself around the memory. But what stuck was the silence after. The smell of charred wood and burned flesh. The way the wind carried off the last of the songs his grandmother used to sing. No one survived that day. No one but him. He didn't cry, didn't bury them, just walked away. Kept walking until the ache in his legs overtook the ache in his chest. Years passed with no words, no tribe, no prayer. Only sky and stone and the sound of his own breathing. Until now. Until her. He hadn't meant for her to change anything. But there was a morning a week after she'd first walked across the clearing when he caught her humming. Just a scrap of melody. No lyrics. Just sound, but it caught in his ribs like a thorn. He didn't say anything, just listened. Let it happen. She caught him watching and blushed, looked down. "Sorry," she mumbled. He shook his head. "You don't have to be sorry for music." She didn't answer, but that day she hummed again. And the day after that she laughed once when a squirrel fell off a branch in front of her. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Then came the horsemen. It was late afternoon. The sky had turned to copper, and a dry wind had started whipping through the trees. Nakai was skinning a rabbit by the fire. Ellie was stripping bark for kindling. The sound came from the west hooves. 3 of them. He stood slow, stepped out to the edge of the clearing. Ellie followed, holding the bundle of bark to her chest like a shield. They came out of the trees like shadows on horseback men dressed like merchants, not ranchers. The one in front was thick around the middle, wore a greasy vest and a felt hat that had seen better years. His mustache looked too polished for someone honest. He smiled the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Afternoon," he called. Nakai didn't answer, just stepped forward, positioning himself between them and Ellie. The fat man's eyes slid toward her. "Well, I'll be." Ellie rose. "Look at you." Her breath hitched. She didn't move, didn't speak. "You gave us a hell of a time," he went on. "Thought you might have died in the woods. Looks like you found yourself a new pet." Nakai's jaw clenched, but he didn't lift his weapon. "Not yet." "She ain't going anywhere," he said. The man tilted his head, still smiling. "Ain't up to you, Red Man. She belongs to my employer. Contracted labor, if you understand what that means." Nakai said nothing, just stared. The man tilted his head, grin still plastered on his slick face. "Ain't up to you, Red Man. She belongs to my employer." Nakai didn't move, didn't blink, didn't say another word. He just stared, calm as stone but ready like a coiled snake. His fingers hovered near the carved edge of the bow slung across his back. The man spat near Nakai's boots, but his eyes were fixed on Ellie standing half a step behind. One man already had his rifle drawn. Another leaned forward in his saddle, eyes sharp and cruel. The fat one, the one who talked before, rode in the center, face twisted with something more dangerous than hate confidence. Nakai moved fast, too fast for talking. He dropped to a knee, bow in hand, arrow knocked and loosed before the first horse had crossed the clearing. The arrow struck true, sank into the thigh of the rider on the left. The man howled, dropping his gun as his horse reared. Blood sprayed onto the dust, dark and thick. He toppled sideways, hit the ground hard. The others pulled up, gun barrels pointed, fingers on triggers. Nakai moved again, diving behind the water trough as the first shot cracked. Wood splintered beside him. Another shot whistled through the air and hit the cabin wall. "Get the girl!" the fat man barked. One of them dismounted and ran low, weaving through brush toward the door. But Nakai was already moving. Fast, silent. A ghost. He came around the far side of the shed, low to the ground, knife drawn. He met the man at the corner, and before the attacker could raise his weapon, Nakai drove the blade deep into his gut. A hard, quick twist. The man grunted. Dropped. Nakai pulled the knife free and turned just as the other rider raised his pistol. But from the tree line came a second crack. Not Nakai's arrow. A rifle. The bullet struck clean right shoulder, spun the shooter halfway around before he dropped his weapon and fell to the ground screaming. From the tree line stepped a man in weathered leather and long braids streaked with silver. He wore a flat-brimmed hat, and the rifle in his hands was lowered but steady. There was a star-shaped badge pinned to his chest, dulled from time but still catching the light. Nakai exhaled, quiet and deep. Tohain. The man said nothing at first. He stepped out, slow boots crunching pine needles underfoot like he'd been watching for longer than just a moment. His eyes swept over the scene, the blood, the guns, the bodies twitching in the dirt. "Figured you were up to something," he said finally. "I was already 3 miles out when your birds started flying south. Figured they knew something I didn't." Tohain wasn't just a sheriff. He was Apache, same as Nakai. They'd grown up not far from each other back when both still had families, back when their people still gathered in the winter to sing. But time had pulled them down different trails. Nakai walked the path of silence. Tohain chose the law as close as a man like him could get to it. Still, they understood each other. "This land belongs to the nation," Tohain said now, loud enough for the last rider to hear. "You step foot here again, you don't walk out." The fat man's eyes flicked from the badge to the rifle, then to Nakai still crouched like a wolf waiting to finish the kill. The message was clear. He backed off without another word. The others groaned in the dust, clutching wounds. Nakai stood still, breathing hard, eyes scanning the trees for more. When none came, he relaxed his bow, but only just. Ellie stood in the doorway, hands white-knuckled around the frame. Her face was pale, but her eyes steady. She hadn't screamed, hadn't run. She watched every second. Later, after the bodies had been dragged off the wounded bound and sent back down the trail under Tohain's warning, the fire returned to a quiet crackle. The clearing smelled of gunpowder and blood. The kind of silence that wasn't peace, just the absence of war. Ellie sat across from him by the fire. The bowl in her lap had gone cold. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to bring this to your door." He didn't answer right away, just stared into the flames. "You didn't," he finally said. It was already here. She looked down. Her hands shook just slightly. "I should go," she whispered. "I've caused enough." That's when he turned to her. And this time he spoke like a man carrying the weight of many winters' words pulled from somewhere far below the surface. "Don't," he said. She froze. "I spent the better part of 20 years hoping the world'd forget about me," he continued, voice slow, rough around the edges. "Didn't build this place for company. Didn't fix the roof so I could listen to someone else breathe." He looked at her, then really looked at the cracks behind her brave eyes, at the scars she tried to hide, at the way she curled her hands when she was scared. "But you came anyway," he said. "Dragged yourself out of hell and stumbled into my woods like it meant something." Ellie's eyes brimmed. She didn't blink. "You laugh now sometimes. Not much. But it's there. And I hear it. I ain't heard that kind of sound in a long damn time." He rubbed his palms together, stared into the fire. "This place ain't much. And I ain't much either. But you're safe here. Not because I say so, but because I make it so." Then quieter. "If you go, I won't stop you. But if you stay, I'll stand in front of you every time they come back." He didn't expect an answer. Didn't need one. But after a long moment, Ellie set the bowl down, stood, and walked over to where he sat. She knelt beside him, leaned in, and rested her forehead against his shoulder. "I'm staying," she said. "Even if I'm scared, I'm staying." He nodded, eyes still on the fire. That was enough. From somewhere far away, deep in a canyon where the wind whistled like a funeral song, other boots stirred. Other hands loaded rifles. This fight wasn't done, not by a long stretch. But for now, in the clearing beneath the wide Arizona sky, two souls rested beside a dying fire. The night stretched out around them like a promise not yet broken. The morning started like any other. That was the worst part. The fire had burned low through the night, leaving nothing but quiet coals. A light fog hung in the low part of the trees, rolling soft over the clearing like it meant no harm. Nakai stood by the edge of the bluff, knife in hand, checking a snare line he'd set the night before. He wasn't gone long, 10 minutes, maybe 12. The kind of time you don't even count. Just enough to see if the rabbits had come back. When he returned, the air was different. Still. Too still. The blanket by the fire pit lay folded in a strange shape. The cup was on its side. The kettle had stopped steaming. And Ellie, she was gone. He froze, not because he didn't know what to do, but because the part of him that had stayed quiet for years, years of solitude, silence, grief, started screaming. Then he moved. Fast. His eyes swept the ground. Tracks, scattered leaves, a broken twig by the edge of the brush, a piece of cloth torn on the thorn bush, bare footprints half dragged. There'd been a struggle. They came while he was away, took her, and they weren't careful. His breath stayed steady, but his hands trembled as he pulled the long knife from his belt, tucked his bow over his shoulder, and started tracking. The trail led deep, through scrub pine rocky shelves over dry stream beds. He saw it all: smeared heel prints, bent grass, a drop of blood on a white rock. He moved without sound the way his uncle taught him when he was just a boy learning to track deer in winter snow. But this wasn't deer. This was Ellie. And whoever had taken her was going to wish they hadn't. By midday, he found the horse's trail. At least 4 of them. One carrying double, judging by the weight in the prints. Ellie's, he figured. The brush had torn a thread from her blanket. He pocketed it, held it a moment longer than he meant to. The tracks turned east into land Nakai hadn't set foot on in years, past the creek that marked the end of what he considered his world. He hesitated there. Crossing meant stepping out of safety, out of the space he'd sworn to stay within. But she was out there. He crossed. By nightfall, the trail grew harder to follow. The riders had started cutting across stone, hiding their direction. But Nakai saw through it. He knew their kind. Men who worked in shadows, who ran operations so far from maps they didn't need names. He remembered rumors from years back about a canyon near Devil's Spine where laborers were hired and never seen again. Women brought in under cover of night, men broken and left in the dirt. That's where they'd gone. But he couldn't do it alone. Not this time. The next morning, Nakai did something he hadn't done in 2 decades. He walked into town. The place hadn't changed much, still the same 3 dusty buildings pretending to be more than they were. A saloon, a post office, and a sheriff's station with a crooked door and 1 window patched with paper. He stepped inside. Tohane was bent over his desk hat on the peg behind him, boot resting on the corner of the wood. He was reading a ledger, but looked up the moment Nakai opened the door, and stared. It had been nearly 15 years since they'd last seen each other in daylight. They'd shared fires once back when they both were boys trying to survive their broken pieces. But Nakai had chosen the mountain, and Tohane chose the law. Each man figured the other was long gone. Now here he stood, older, quieter, but still solid as stone. "Well, hell," Tohane said softly, standing. "Ain't you a ghost?" Nakai didn't waste words. "They took her," he said. Tohane's eyes narrowed. "Who men from the camp near Devil's Spine?" Tohane paused, then nodded slowly. "I've heard the stories. Ain't been able to prove a damn thing. They have Ellie, white girl, scarred up, escaped weeks back." Tohane didn't ask how Nakai knew her. Didn't need to. "You want help?" he asked. Nakai nodded once. "I'll ride," Tohane said, grabbing his rifle. "Give me 30 minutes to gather the right men." The ride took most of the day. They moved fast. Nakai rode like the wind pulled him. Tohane kept pace, flanked by 3 men he trusted, quiet types with hard eyes and steady hands. By dusk, they reached the ridge overlooking the canyon. Smoke curled from below, black smoke, thick and greasy. Someone was burning wood that wasn't dry, or something else entirely. They dismounted and crept in. Nakai went alone at first, scouting ahead. He moved from boulder to boulder, crouched low. He could see the camp now, hidden deep in the cleft, tucked behind natural stone walls. Ellie was there. He saw her tied to a post, wrists bound, lips bloody. Her eyes were open, alert. But she didn't cry. He also saw him. The fat man. The one who'd come to the cabin weeks back. Only now he wasn't smiling. He was pacing drunk on his own power, barking orders at the others. He walked up to Ellie, cupped her face in one hand, hard and possessive. "You'll see, girl," he was saying. "You coulda had it easy. I offered you a place, offered you a name. You spit on it. Think I don't got others. Think I need your permission." Ellie said nothing. Her chin trembled, but she met his eyes with pure fire. "I coulda made you a wife," he said low and mean. "Woulda dressed you nice, kept you safe. But no, you'd rather be a slave. So be it." He raised a hand, gripped the front of his belt. That's when Nakai moved. He was across the rocks in seconds, dropped down into the outer ring of the camp like a shadow. First knife silent straight into the guard near the tents. Second guard turned, saw nothing but a blur before his throat opened. Nakai crept behind a pile of crates almost to Ellie when a boot scraped behind him. He turned too late. A rifle butt slammed into his shoulder. He fell, rolled, and came up fast, blade in hand. The attacker lunged. They struggled. Nakai drove the knife in deep, but not before others heard. Shouts rang out, guns raised, footsteps thundered across the dirt. Then chaos. Nakai dodged between tents, arrows flying from his back quiver. One stuck into a man's leg, another dropped his pistol before he could fire. He made it to Ellie, cut her free with a single slash. "Can you run?" he rasped. She nodded barely. Blood at her lip, one eye swollen, but her hands gripped his sleeve. Then came the shot. The fat man, red-faced and wild-eyed, had raised a pistol. Nakai turned to shield Ellie just as the bullet cracked. He felt the fire tear through his side, like lightning wrapped in iron. His knees buckled, but he didn't fall. He shoved Ellie behind him. "I'm not leaving," she cried. Then more gunfire, but this time from the ridge. Tohain. He and his men came storming down the path, rifles raised, shouting commands in a voice that cut through the night like thunder. "Drop your weapons! Hands up now!" The traffickers scattered. Some ran. One tried to fire but went down before his finger could move. The fat man turned, tried to flee. Tohain shot the leg out from under him. Dust rose. Silence followed. Nakai collapsed to one knee. Ellie caught him before he fell. Later, under the cover of a sky bruised deep with twilight, the camp was cleared. Survivors were taken into custody. The rest didn't move. Tohain crouched beside Nakai, now seated against a rock shirt soaked with blood, but wound wrapped tight. "You're an idiot," Tohain said, not unkindly. Nakai just smirked. "You came all this way," the sheriff went on. "Asked for help, took a bullet. All for a girl." "She ain't a girl," Nakai said. "She's light." Tohain didn't say anything after that, just patted his shoulder, stood, and walked away to finish the job. They came back to the cabin under a sky that held no color. Nakai rode with one hand tight over the wound in his side, blood soaking the fabric below his ribs. Ellie stayed close behind him, walking most of the way despite the bruises that still colored her skin. She didn't ask for rest. She didn't complain. She only watched him steady and wordless, like the sky watches over the desert, always there, but never pressing. It was dark when they reached the clearing. The cabin stood just as they'd left it. The fire circle cold, the wind chimes Ellie had made from shell buttons and old spoons clinking soft in the breeze. There was no welcome, no ceremony, just the sound of the wind through pine needles like a memory whispering back to life. Nakai didn't say anything. He just pushed open the door, stepped inside, and dropped to one knee. His breath caught in his throat. Ellie was there in a second, arms under his shoulders, lowering him slow to the floor. "I'll fix it," she said. "I'll do it right." And she did. With boiled water and the herbs he'd once taught her to gather, she cleaned the wound, stitched it shut, with hands that trembled, then stilled, then trembled again. But she didn't stop. When it was done, she sat beside him, not saying a word, just listening to the fire she'd lit begin to crackle and breathe again. He woke the next morning to the smell of sage and the low hum of her voice. Not a song, not even words, just a sound, like peace. For the first time in weeks, Ellie slept through the night. No screams, no twitching, no waking in a cold sweat. And when the wind moaned through the trees, she didn't flinch, didn't reach for the knife she kept under her pillow. This was home now, and she knew it. Days passed the way they do when nothing burns and no one bleeds, slow, steady, with meaning stitched into the smallest acts. Ellie started weaving again. Not fine cloth, just tight strips of bark and thread from an old wool sack tied around the rim of a water jug to keep the bugs out. She pressed wildflowers in an old book Tohain had brought from town. She learned the names of the herbs growing near the eastern bluff, picked the ones that kept away headaches, saved the roots that healed the gut. She asked questions. Why does the wind always come from the west? Do wolves ever come this low? What does Nadlehi mean in Apache? Nakai answered. Some shrugged at others and made a mark on the wood wall when she said her first full sentence in his language. I bring wood for fire. He didn't say it, but something inside him ached good. One morning he swept the porch without thinking, just picked up the broom, moved the dust aside, and watched as sunlight hit the clean boards for the first time in years. Ellie leaned against the doorframe watching him. She didn't say anything, just smiled, a small thing, but it lit the whole damn clearing. They didn't talk about love, didn't say it, didn't name it. But when they sat together by the fire, and Ellie reached out and slid her fingers over his gentle, slow, like asking a question without words, and he didn't pull away, but held her hand in both of his. That said enough. When the wolves cried out in the hills low and lonesome, she would shift closer to him, rest her shoulder against his. He would stay still, let her lean, and sometimes just Sometimes he'd whisper an old word in a language she was still learning, and she'd whisper it back. One night when the stars were thick and the fire small, Ellie knelt beside him, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. She looked nervous but not scared. Her eyes had that light again. "Nakai," she said slow and halting Apache. "I can be your person, always." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. Didn't need to say more. The next day they walked into the woods together. She wore a woven band of green leaves around her wrist. He carried a pouch of tobacco and stones from his people's mountain. They stood before an old cedar tree and spoke no vows, but they did what mattered. They were seen by the sky, by the earth, by the wind that carried the scent of fire and pine. That was enough. The seasons turned without permission. What started as a quiet life between two broken souls became something more, not loud, not grand, but real. Ellie woke before sunrise to boil herbs while Nakai checked the traps and reset the stones around the garden. They moved like two parts of the same rhythm, always near, always listening. She laughed more. Not the kind that tore through the air, the kind that slipped out while she worked, or when she tripped over a stubborn root, or when Nakai told her the rabbit stew tasted like leather. He never said he loved her, but he made her tea before she asked. He warmed her boots before she woke. He built a chair just the right size for her so she wouldn't have to sit on the step anymore. And that's the thing about people like Nakai. They don't speak their hearts. They build them. Word spread slow at first. A woman safe in the woods. A man who fought off the ones who tried to take her. A cabin somewhere out near the spine where the fire never went out, and someone would stand between you and whatever chased you. At first it was just letters, notes left in town. Then a woman came, face-thin, eyes flat like a deer who'd run too long. Ellie gave her the cot-made tea. Nakai didn't speak much, but he cleaned out a space in the shed for her to sleep while she healed. Then another. A mother with 2 girls. Then 3 more, all quiet, all scarred in some way that didn't show on the skin. The cabin became more than a cabin. It became a place, a gate. And Ellie, once the girl who had no name left, became someone who opened that gate and held it. They didn't talk about the past much. Didn't need to. Each scar had a voice, and each voice was heard. Not with words, with time, with meals shared and nights spent by the fire listening to the wind. The women worked the land. Ellie taught them what she'd learned: how to dry sage, how to trap rabbits, how to tell when a man's footsteps meant danger. Nakai stayed quiet, but he carved more. Symbols on wood, on stone. Old signs of his people etched into doorposts and trees. One day a girl asked him what they meant. He just pointed at one and said, "Safe." Years passed like water through the canyon, not rushing, just steady. Ellie's hair grew longer. She started tying it back with the same ribbon she'd worn around her wrist the day they wed. Nakai grew slower, but not weak, just more still. They'd sit on the porch most nights side by side, watching the firelight flicker inside. Some nights there was music, an old harmonica someone found, or a hum from Ellie as she cooked. And some nights there was silence. But it was a good silence, a full one. They weren't heroes. They never claimed to be. They were just 2 people who didn't turn away, who built something in a place where everything else had burned. And in a world where the dark still roamed, sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. And you, reader, who are you in this story? Are you the one running, or the one who stays? Are you the flame, or the hand that shields it? Out here on the edge of things, it only takes one soul not to look away and a place to rest. Your name to turn a story from ending into beginning. Hey friend, if you made it this far, thank you for staying with me through every page, every shadow, and every flicker of firelight in Nakai and Ellie's journey. I know this one wasn't easy. It was raw, it was quiet, and at times it hurt to sit with. But isn't that the mark of a story worth telling? To me, this wasn't just about survival. It was about healing. Not the loud, triumphant kind, but the kind that happens in silence, in kindness, in the spaces between words. Nakai carried the ghost of a whole people on his back. Ellie bore wounds no one should. And yet, somehow they found peace, not by running, but by standing still and opening a door for others who needed it. What hit me most was that idea that sometimes you don't have to be a hero. Sometimes it's enough just to be the one who stays, the one who listens, the one who says, "You're safe now." That's powerful. That's human. And I think we need more stories like this, stories where strength looks like tenderness, where love builds in silence, and where home isn't a place, but a choice. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of this story stayed with you? What did you feel when Ellie asked to be his person? Or when Nakai said, "She's light"? Let's talk in the comments. I'd really love to hear how you saw it. And if this story touched something in you, even a little, maybe share it with someone who needs reminding that quiet people still make the biggest difference. See you in the next one. And hey, don't forget to leave a light on. Someone out there might be looking for it.